Rain fell harder the moment the last train disappeared into the darkness, leaving the battered wheelchair alone beneath the broken awning of the station. A man sat motionless in it, soaked through, wearing a torn gray jacket, worn trousers, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. Just a few blocks away, his black luxury car waited with its driver, but tonight he had deliberately left it behind. He had also removed his expensive watch, hidden his phone, covered his neatly styled hair, and rubbed dirt across his hands. For the first time in his life, billionaire Marcus Vail wanted to know what people would see when they could see nothing else. For nearly an hour, strangers had passed him. Some glanced briefly before looking away. Others stepped around the wheelchair as though he were part of the pavement. Marcus watched them silently, feeling something inside him grow heavier with every passing minute. He had spent years surrounded by people who smiled when he entered a room, shook his hand when he signed a deal, and called him generous whenever cameras were watching. But he had begun wondering whether anyone would stay if there was nothing to gain from staying. Then a young woman suddenly stopped across the sidewalk. She looked at Marcus, then at the empty station, and her expression hardened with anger. She wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking around as if searching for the person who had abandoned him. "Who left you here?" she asked. Marcus lowered his eyes and said nothing. The woman glanced at the rain pouring through the broken roof. "You can't stay here." She crouched beside his wheelchair, trying to shield him from the rain with her small umbrella. "Can you walk?" Marcus shook his head. She sighed, clearly frustrated by the situation, not by him. "Fine. I can't take you home," she said, standing again. "But I know somewhere you can sleep safely tonight." Marcus looked up at her, stunned. She had no idea who he was. She didn't know that the man sitting helplessly in front of her owned company's worth billions. And yet, she had stopped when everyone else had walked away. For the first time that night, Marcus wondered whether his strange experiment had already given him an answer he wasn't prepared to hear. Maya pushed Marcus through the rain toward a small community rehabilitation center tucked between two aging buildings, its windows glowing softly against the darkness. She worked there in the evenings, and even though she had already finished her shift, she knew the night supervisor would let her bring someone inside if he had nowhere else to go. Before they reached the entrance, Marcus quietly reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "At least take this," he said. Maya glanced at the money, then at him. "Keep it." Marcus frowned. "You bought me food. You paid for the bus." Maya shrugged. So you shouldn't have to spend your own money on me." She looked at him for a moment, almost offended. "I didn't help you because I expected something back." Inside, Marcus watched her disappear toward a vending machine, then return with a sandwich and a bottle of water. She handed them to him before taking anything for herself. When the security guard approached and frowned at the wheelchair, Maya immediately stepped between them. "He's staying tonight." The guard shook his head. "We don't usually allow people who aren't registered." "Then register him tomorrow," Maya replied. "Tonight, he has nowhere else to go." "Maya, you can't keep bringing strangers in." Her voice softened, but her expression didn't change. "He's not a stranger anymore. I know his name." Marcus stared at her. She knew almost nothing about him, yet somehow she had already decided that was enough. Later, while he ate quietly, Marcus noticed a photograph pinned beside the reception desk. It showed Maya standing beside an older man in a hospital room, both smiling despite the exhaustion in their faces. Marcus pointed toward it. "Your father." Maya's expression changed instantly. "He was." She turned away before saying anything else. Marcus noticed the sadness she was trying to hide, but he didn't ask. For the first time, he began wondering why someone who seemed so strong carried such a quiet wound. And Maya, unaware that the helpless man beside her was worth billions, simply placed a blanket over his shoulders and walked away. Marcus looked down at the blanket, realizing that tonight, for once, someone had given him something money could never buy. Morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside the rehabilitation center covered in silver puddles. Marcus sat near the window, watching people hurry past with their heads lowered, while Maya organized medical supplies behind the reception desk. When she finally had a quiet moment, she pulled a chair beside him. "I never asked your name properly," she said. Marcus hesitated for only a second. He had prepared a false identity before leaving his mansion, but now the lie felt strangely uncomfortable. "Marcus Reed," he finally said, using his mother's maiden name. Maya smiled. "Marcus. That's better than the guy from the train station." He almost laughed. She asked what had happened to him, and Marcus lowered his eyes, giving her the story he had rehearsed. He told her that a business he had invested everything in had collapsed, leaving him with nothing. Months later, he had been involved in an accident that damaged his spine and left him unable to walk. According to the story, the people he once trusted disappeared when the money did. Maya listened without interrupting. Marcus expected questions, sympathy, maybe even disbelief. Instead, she simply nodded. "That sounds like a lot to lose." "It is," he answered quietly. "But I suppose you get used to losing things." Maya studied him. "Do you?" Marcus looked at her. "What do you mean? You keep saying, 'I lost this and I lost that.' You never say what you still have." The question caught him completely off guard. Before he could answer, Maya placed a breakfast tray in front of him. "Eat." Marcus looked at the food. "I'm not hungry." "That's not an answer." "I said I'm not hungry." Maya sighed. "Fine. Then choose something else." Marcus stared at her. "What?" "Anything. You keep sitting there waiting for everyone to decide things for you." Her words irritated him more than he expected. His entire life, people had rushed to anticipate his needs. Assistants had chosen his meals, managers had prepared his schedules, and employees had waited for his decisions. Yet this woman was asking him to choose his own breakfast as if his opinion actually mattered. "You really don't make things easy, do you?" he muttered. Maya smiled. "Neither does life." She walked away, leaving Marcus staring after her. For the first time since beginning his experiment, he realized something unsettling. Maya wasn't treating him like a billionaire, but she wasn't treating him like a helpless man either. She was treating him like a person. And somehow, that felt more uncomfortable than being ignored. Maya knew the rehabilitation center could only shelter Daniel for one night, so the next afternoon she led him down a narrow street to an old bakery with faded lettering above the door. The elderly owner, Mrs. Alvarez, had a small apartment upstairs that had been empty for years, and after Maya explained Daniel's situation, she agreed to let him stay there temporarily. The apartment was nothing like the places Daniel was used to. The walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked near one corner, and the tiny window looked directly over the bakery's worn-out sign. Every morning, the smell of fresh bread drifted upstairs through the floorboards. Daniel found himself staring at the city through that small window, remembering the glass towers where he had once held meetings that could move millions of dollars with a single decision. Here, he could hear delivery trucks rattling over broken pavement and customers arguing over the price of bread. Yet strangely, the silence of this tiny room felt more peaceful than his enormous mansion. Maya worked downstairs several afternoons a week, and Daniel quickly began finding small things that needed fixing. One morning, a loose cabinet door suddenly worked perfectly. Another day, the broken window latch had been repaired. Maya noticed. "Did you fix that?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "Maybe it fixed itself." She narrowed her eyes. "Doors don't usually repair themselves." Daniel smiled innocently. "You'd be surprised." Later, she caught him examining the bakery's ancient electrical panel with the confidence of someone who clearly understood what he was seeing. "You said you knew nothing about repairs." "I said I wasn't good with repairs." Maya crossed her arms. "That's not what you said." Daniel laughed, trying to hide his discomfort. She was beginning to notice the contradictions. He knew how to fix machinery, understood business terminology he shouldn't have known, and sometimes spoke with an educated precision that didn't match his story. But she never confronted him. One evening, as they stood outside the bakery, a sleek black sedan stopped across the street. Daniel glanced at it and immediately said, "That's a limited production Meridian V12. They only made a few hundred." Maya turned toward him slowly. "How do you know that?" Daniel froze. For the first time, he had no quick answer. Maya looked from him to the expensive car and back again. Her suspicion had just become something much stronger. Daniel had originally planned to stay hidden for 30 days, learn what Maya was really like, and then quietly disappear before she could become attached to him. But the plan began falling apart when Maya asked him to help with a children's rehabilitation fundraiser. The center needed money for new therapy equipment, yet a local sponsor had suddenly withdrawn, leaving Maya frustrated and exhausted. Daniel studied the numbers she had spread across the bakery table and quietly pointed out that they were spending too much on one supplier while receiving almost nothing in return. Maya stared at him. "How did you notice that so quickly?" Daniel shrugged. "It just seemed obvious." He helped her restructure the budget, contact a cheaper supplier, and organize donations without ever revealing how naturally business strategy came to him. By the end of the evening, they had saved enough money to keep the fundraiser alive. Maya smiled at him with genuine admiration. "You know, Daniel, you're actually brilliant." He looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment. Nobody had ever praised him for being useful rather than powerful. Over the following days, their connection deepened through ordinary moments. They shared simple meals downstairs after the bakery closed, argued over which music to play, laughed when Daniel accidentally dropped a tray of bread, and stayed awake late talking about dreams they had never told anyone else. Maya spoke about the people she helped at the center and how she believed nobody should be defined by the worst thing that had happened to them. Daniel listened more than he spoke. The more time he spent around her, the more uncomfortable his original plan became. He had wanted to discover whether Maya could care about a man without money. But now he was facing a much more frightening possibility. What if she already cared about him? Not Marcus Vale, the billionaire whose name appeared in newspapers and business magazines, but Daniel Reed, the supposedly broken man sitting in a wheelchair above an old bakery. One night, Maya placed a cup of tea beside him and said, "You know, you're not as helpless as you pretend to be." Daniel looked at her, his heart suddenly beating faster. "Maybe I'm just afraid to try." Maya smiled softly. "Then maybe you need someone who won't let you give up." She walked away, leaving Daniel staring at the tea. His experiment had changed without his permission. He was no longer watching Maya to discover her heart. He was becoming afraid she might discover his. Daniel first noticed the locked door late one evening when Maya returned from the rehabilitation center carrying a small cardboard box. She paused when she saw him standing in the hallway, then quickly slipped the box through the door before locking it again. "What's in there?" Daniel asked casually. Maya looked at him for a moment. "Something I don't talk about." He nodded, expecting the subject to end there, but later that night, he heard her crying quietly downstairs. The next morning, Daniel found her sitting alone beside the bakery window, staring at an old photograph. He didn't ask what was wrong. Instead, he placed a cup of coffee beside her and waited. After several minutes, Maya finally spoke. "My younger brother, Samuel, was 19 when everything changed." She explained that Samuel had been seriously injured while working near a construction site owned by a powerful company. The company had immediately sent lawyers, investigators, and representatives who insisted the accident was unavoidable. Then came a settlement offer large enough to silence most people. Maya's family accepted because they needed money for Samuel's treatment, but Maya eventually discovered evidence suggesting the company had ignored serious safety problems before the accident. "They didn't apologize," she said quietly. "They sent paperwork." Daniel felt something tighten inside him. Maya continued, explaining that years later she realized the settlement had been designed to make the family stop asking questions. "That's when I learned something," she said. "Money can pay for lawyers. It can pay for hospitals. It can even make people disappear. But it can't make something wrong become right." Daniel lowered his eyes. His own company had fought countless lawsuits using expensive legal teams. He had always viewed them as necessary business decisions, never stopping to imagine the faces behind the documents. Now Maya's words were forcing him to see those cases differently. "Do you hate wealthy people?" he asked quietly. Maya shook her head. "No. I hate what some wealthy people think money gives them permission to do." Daniel looked toward the locked door. Behind it was the life Maya had never fully left behind. And suddenly, his disguise no longer felt like a clever experiment. It felt like a betrayal waiting to happen. Because if Maya ever discovered that Daniel Reed was actually Marcus Vale, the billionaire behind one of the most powerful companies in the city, she might not see the man she had come to trust. She might see everything she had spent years learning to fear. The bakery was unusually quiet that evening when the old television above the counter suddenly interrupted the cooking program with breaking business news. Maya was carrying a tray of bread when the screen changed, and a familiar-looking face appeared beside the headline about the city's missing billionaire. "Marcus Vale, CEO of Vale Industries, has not appeared publicly for several weeks." Maya stopped walking. The photograph on the screen showed a sharply dressed man with the same eyes, the same jawline, and the same faint scar near his eyebrow that Daniel had. She looked toward him. Daniel was sitting only a few feet away. For one terrifying second, their eyes met. Daniel immediately reached for the remote and switched the television off. "Bad news," he said quickly. Maya didn't move. "You know him?" Daniel forced a small laugh. "He reminds me of someone I used to know." Maya's eyes remained fixed on him. "Someone who looks exactly like you?" Daniel's stomach tightened. Before he could answer, a delivery truck pulled up outside, giving him an excuse to change the subject. But Maya had already noticed something else. The expression on his face wasn't confusion. It was fear. Across the city, Daniel's absence was creating a very different kind of panic. His chief advisor, Adrian Cole, had discovered that Daniel's private security team had been unable to locate him for weeks. At first, Adrian believed the billionaire was simply conducting another secret business operation, but now concern had turned into a full search. Daniel's phone remained switched off. His car had been abandoned several blocks from the train station. Security footage showed him entering the neighborhood alone. Adrian began tracing every possible lead, unaware that the missing billionaire was sleeping above a bakery less than 10 miles away. Back at the bakery, Maya quietly turned the television back on after Daniel went upstairs. The news report showed Marcus Vale's photograph again. She stared at the screen, then slowly looked toward the ceiling. She remembered his knowledge of luxury cars, his understanding of business, the way he had analyzed the fundraiser's finances, and now the uncanny resemblance. One possibility entered her mind, but she immediately rejected it. "That's impossible," she whispered. Upstairs, Daniel sat in darkness, realizing the distance between his two lives was disappearing rapidly. He had wanted to know whether Maya could love him without his fortune. Now he was terrified of what would happen when she learned the truth. Daniel had never imagined that a birthday could hurt. For most of his life, birthdays had meant private dining rooms, expensive gifts, famous guests, and rooms filled with people who laughed at every joke because they wanted something from him. But this year, he almost forgot the date entirely. Maya didn't. She surprised him after the bakery closed, carrying a small cake with uneven frosting while several people from the rehabilitation center followed behind her holding handwritten notes. There were no cameras, no expensive decorations, and no champagne. Just warm bread from the bakery, a few paper cups, and a crooked birthday banner taped to the wall. Daniel stared at everything in silence. "You did this?" he asked. Maya smiled. "Don't look so shocked. You're allowed to have a birthday. One of the children from the center handed him a card covered in colorful drawings. Daniel opened it and struggled to keep his eyes dry. Maya noticed and gently looked away, giving him the privacy to feel something he had spent years avoiding. Later, when everyone had left, Daniel sat beside her near the bakery window. I've had bigger birthdays, he admitted. I'm sure you have. I've had hundreds of people come to them. Maya smiled. And how many stayed after the cake was gone? Daniel couldn't answer. She looked at him quietly. Being loved shouldn't depend on being impressive, Daniel. Those words struck deeper than she could know. He almost told her everything. He almost said his real name, told her about the mansion, the companies, the fortune, and the world she had unknowingly placed him inside. His lips parted, but fear stopped him. If he confessed now, he might lose the only person who had ever cared about him without knowing what he owned. There's something I need to tell you, he finally said. Maya looked at him expectantly. Daniel's courage disappeared. After the fundraiser, he whispered. I'll tell you everything after the fundraiser. Maya smiled, trusting him completely. Then I'll wait. That simple promise made Daniel feel worse. He knew the truth could no longer stay hidden forever, yet instead of confessing, he chose a few more days of happiness. As Maya walked away, Daniel looked at the birthday card in his hands and realized something terrifying. He hadn't been pretending anymore. Somewhere along the way, the disguise had become the most honest version of himself. The fundraiser was supposed to be the one peaceful day before Daniel told Maya the truth. Instead, it became the day everything began collapsing. The rehabilitation center was crowded with families, volunteers, donated equipment, and children laughing as they moved between tables. Maya was everywhere at once, carrying boxes, checking names, and making sure nobody felt forgotten. Daniel stayed near the entrance, helping however he could, when a young volunteer lifted a phone to capture a photograph of the event. Daniel didn't notice the picture being taken. In it, Maya was standing beside him, smiling while Daniel looked at her with an expression far more intimate than either of them realized. That evening, the photograph appeared online with a small article about the disappearance of billionaire Marcus Vail. At first, nobody paid attention. Then someone noticed the man in the photograph. The resemblance was almost impossible to ignore. Within hours, the image had been reposted across several local pages with wild speculation attached to it. One headline claimed that the missing billionaire might be hiding in the city disguised as a disabled homeless man. Another suggested that his disappearance was connected to a secret business investigation. A financial journalist eventually received the photograph and immediately recognized Marcus's face. The story began spreading faster. Meanwhile, Daniel's security team narrowed their search to the neighborhood surrounding the bakery. Adrian Cole was now certain that Daniel had deliberately disappeared and might be in danger. Back at the bakery, Maya was scrolling through her phone when she suddenly laughed. People online are unbelievable, she said, showing Daniel the article. Listen to this. They think Marcus Vail is hiding somewhere in the city pretending to be homeless. Daniel stared at the screen. His face went pale. Maya stopped laughing. She looked at him instead. Daniel? He couldn't answer. His hands tightened around the arms of his wheelchair. Maya slowly lowered the phone. Why do you look scared? Daniel swallowed hard. Because, he stopped. Outside, a dark vehicle passed the bakery and slowed near the corner. Daniel recognized the security insignia on its windshield. His world had finally found him. Maya watched his expression change and realized something was terribly wrong. The man she thought she knew was staring at the screen as though he had just seen his entire life exposed. And for the first time, Maya wasn't wondering whether Daniel was hiding something. She was wondering what. Maya waited until the bakery had closed before confronting Daniel. She locked the front door, turned off the lights, and walked upstairs without saying a word. Daniel knew exactly why she had followed him. He sat near the window, staring at the dark street below, when Maya finally spoke. "Who are you?" Daniel looked at her. "I told you who I am." "No," she said quietly. "You told me a story." The words landed harder than an accusation. Daniel looked away. Maya placed her phone on the table, the photograph still visible on the screen. "You knew exactly who that man was. You knew what was happening when the news appeared. And now you're telling me nothing." Daniel closed his eyes. He could end the lie in one sentence. He could tell her his real name, explain the experiment, and finally stop pretending. But fear took control. The story about losing everything wasn't true, he admitted. Maya's face tightened. "So you lied to me?" "Yes." "About the accident?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." She stepped back as though the admission physically hurt. "Then what part of you is real?" Daniel struggled to answer. "Everything that happened between us." Maya looked at him with disbelief. "You don't get to decide that for me." Daniel lowered his head. "I know." For several seconds, neither spoke. Maya could have walked away, and part of Daniel expected her to. Instead, she sat across from him. "I'm going to give you one chance to explain," she said. "Not because I trust you. Because I think people deserve the chance to tell the truth before they're judged." Daniel stared at her, overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer. "I was afraid," he finally whispered. Maya frowned. "Afraid of what?" He couldn't say it. "Not yet." "Of what you'd think of me." Maya's eyes filled with disappointment. "You should have trusted me enough to let me decide." Daniel had no defense. The experiment he once controlled was gone. This was no longer about discovering whether Maya could love a poor man. It was about whether she could forgive a man who had deliberately built their relationship on a lie. And Daniel suddenly understood that revealing his fortune might be easier than revealing the real reason he had been hiding it. He wasn't protecting himself from losing his money. He was protecting himself from losing her. The sound of several vehicles stopping outside the bakery made Daniel's stomach drop. Maya looked through the upstairs window and saw 3 black SUVs parked along the narrow street, followed by another car carrying 2 men in dark suits. She immediately understood that whoever had arrived was looking for Daniel. The bakery door opened, and Adrian Cole stepped inside with several security officers behind him. His expression changed the moment he saw Daniel. "Mr. Reed," he said with unmistakable relief. Maya froze. Daniel closed his eyes. The name echoed through the room like a final piece of a puzzle. Maya slowly turned toward him. "Reed?" she whispered. Daniel said nothing. Adrian looked confused, then realized what had happened. "Sir, we need to leave immediately." Maya stared at Daniel. "Sir?" Her eyes moved from his worn clothes to the expensive vehicles outside. "Who are you?" Daniel finally stood from the wheelchair, revealing that he could walk. Maya's face went completely still. "You're not disabled." Daniel shook his head. "No, you're not homeless." "No," her voice became quieter. "You're Marcus Vale." Daniel nodded. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Maya stepped backward. "How long?" Daniel tried to explain. "It started as an experiment." "An experiment?" Her eyes filled with anger. "You watched me struggle to help you because you wanted to see what I'd do without knowing your money. I wanted to know whether someone could care about me without wanting something." Maya laughed bitterly. "So you made me prove something I never agreed to prove." Daniel's face fell. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did." He stepped toward her. "Everything I felt for you was real." Maya looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Maybe it was real for you. But I didn't get to choose the truth." Daniel had spent his entire life believing money gave him control over every situation. Yet standing in that tiny apartment, surrounded by the people who had come to return him to his old life, he finally understood what wealth could never purchase: another person's trust. Adrian quietly stepped outside, leaving them alone. Maya looked at Daniel one last time. "You wanted to know whether I could love a man without his fortune," she said. "Now you need to ask yourself whether you were brave enough to let me know the real man." Daniel had no answer. For the first time, being the most powerful man in the room meant absolutely nothing. Maya stood near the doorway, watching Daniel struggle to find words that could repair what he had broken. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I can fix this," he said. "I can explain everything. I can make sure you never have to worry about money again." Maya shook her head. "That's exactly the problem, Daniel." He stopped. "You think everything can be fixed with money." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "I'm not angry because you're rich. I'm angry because you lied." Daniel looked down. "I thought people only cared about me because of what I could give them." Maya's voice softened. "Then maybe you should have given someone the chance to know you before deciding they couldn't love you." Daniel had no response. She continued, "You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You made me prove something you were too afraid to believe." He looked at her helplessly. "Would you have stayed if I had told you from the beginning?" Maya paused. "I don't know." Daniel's heart sank. "That's the answer I was afraid of." She shook her head. "No. That's the answer you should have allowed me to give you." Daniel realized how deeply flawed his experiment had been. He had spent weeks pretending to be someone else because he feared people would reject the real him. But Maya had never asked for his money, his company, or his status. She had simply asked him to be honest. And he had failed to give her even that. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Maya looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you're sorry." Daniel's eyes lifted with a small spark of hope. "But I'm not ready to forgive you." She walked toward the door. Daniel wanted to stop her, but he knew he had no right. Maya paused before leaving. "If you really want to change, don't try to buy your way back into my life." Then she walked downstairs and disappeared into the street. Daniel remained alone in the apartment above the bakery, surrounded by everything he had once considered worthless. His security team was waiting outside. His mansion was waiting. His fortune was waiting. Yet the one thing he wanted most was walking farther away with every passing second. For the first time in his life, Daniel understood what it meant to lose something money could not replace. Now he had to discover whether trust, once broken, could ever be earned again. Daniel could have sent Maya 100 gifts before sunrise, bought the rehabilitation center, or paid every bill her family had ever struggled with. Instead, he did something that frightened him far more. He opened the oldest legal files inside Vale Industries and searched for the company records connected to Samuel's accident. What he found made his stomach turn. Years before Daniel became CEO, Vale Industries had acquired the construction firm responsible for the site where Samuel had been injured. Buried inside an old internal report was evidence that safety complaints had been ignored and inspection records had been altered before the accident. Senior executives had protected the company with lawyers and settlements, exactly the way Maya had described. Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the documents. He could quietly compensate Samuel's family and make the problem disappear. But then Maya's words returned to him. Money could pay for lawyers. It could make people stop asking questions. If he secretly paid them, he would be doing the same thing as the people who had caused the damage. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency board meeting. "We're opening an independent investigation into the accident," he announced. Several executives immediately objected. They warned him that the investigation could expose the company to lawsuits, destroy investor confidence, and cost millions. Daniel listened without changing his decision. "If the truth damages us, then we deserve to face the damage." He ordered every relevant document released to independent investigators and publicly accepted responsibility for the company's failure to uncover the misconduct sooner. The announcement shook the business world. Vail Industries stock dropped sharply, investors demanded answers, and several senior executives resigned. Daniel watched the numbers falling across his office screen, but for the first time, he didn't feel the instinct to control them. He wasn't trying to protect his fortune anymore. He was trying to stop using it as a shield. When Maya heard the announcement, she recognized the company immediately. She realized Daniel was risking everything to expose the very system that had once protected people like him. She still wasn't ready to forgive him, but something inside her changed. Daniel had finally understood the difference between paying for someone's silence and accepting responsibility for the truth. And this time, he wasn't asking Maya to believe him. He was willing to let his actions speak without demanding anything in return. The investigation did not take long to uncover what Maya had feared for years. Buried beneath old legal files were altered reports, missing witness statements, and internal emails proving that the company had known far more about her brother's accident than anyone had ever admitted. Daniel stood in a crowded press conference with the evidence in his hands, knowing every camera was waiting for him to protect his reputation. Instead, he told the truth. He admitted that he had not caused the accident, but his company had inherited and benefited from a system that had allowed innocent people to be silenced. He ordered the evidence released, reopened the case, and accepted the financial consequences that followed. For the first time in his life, Daniel used his fortune without trying to control the result. Maya watched the announcement from the rehabilitation center, but she did not call him. She was not ready. Daniel understood that doing the right thing did not purchase forgiveness. So he stopped trying to buy it. He began visiting the center openly, helping with repairs, funding equipment only when the staff requested it, and spending time with patients without mentioning Maya. He no longer wore torn clothes or pretended to need anyone's pity. He simply showed up as himself. One evening, Maya found him fixing a broken wheelchair ramp outside the building. She stood silently for a moment before asking, "Are you doing this because you want me back?" Daniel lowered his tools and shook his head. "No. I'm doing it because it needed to be done." Maya studied his face, realizing that the man standing before her was finally becoming someone who could give without expecting something in return. She still wasn't ready to forgive him, but for the first time, she believed his change was real. Months later, the rehabilitation center was crowded with volunteers, families, patients, and people who had come to support the fundraiser. Daniel arrived quietly, without a line of black cars or an army of assistants announcing his presence. Instead of standing on a stage surrounded by important guests, he rolled his wheelchair into the middle of the room and sat beside the people everyone else usually overlooked. A young wheelchair user recognized him from television and stared in disbelief. "You're Daniel Reed," he said. "Why are you sitting here with us?" Daniel smiled softly. "Because this is where I should have been looking all along." Across the room, Maya heard those words and slowly turned toward him. She remembered the man who had once pretended to need everyone, then the billionaire who had lied to her, and finally the man who had accepted responsibility without demanding forgiveness. Daniel caught her watching but did not approach. He had learned that love was not something he could chase, purchase, or force. Maya walked closer on her own. "You really don't need to pretend anymore," she said. Daniel looked down at the wheelchair beneath him, then back at her. "I know." For a moment, neither spoke. The room continued around them, but Maya could see something different in his eyes now. There was no performance, no test, and no hidden calculation. Just a man who had finally stopped being afraid of being ordinary. She wasn't ready to erase what happened, but she no longer saw him as the same man who had left that rainy train station months earlier. And for Daniel, that small change in her expression meant more than every billion-dollar deal he had ever won. Daniel did not ask Maya to forgive him, and he certainly did not get down on one knee. Instead, he stood a few feet away and said the simplest thing he had ever asked of her. "Would you let me meet you again?" Maya looked at him carefully. "Meet me again?" Daniel nodded. "As myself. No disguise. No test. No lies. If you say no, I'll respect it." Maya remained silent for several seconds before a faint smile appeared on her face. "One coffee," she said. "That's all I'm promising." Their first meeting as themselves was strangely awkward. Daniel was used to negotiating billion-dollar contracts, but sitting across from Maya with nothing to hide made him nervous. She teased him about being terrible at choosing coffee, and he laughed in a way she had rarely heard before. Slowly, the tension disappeared. They talked about the bakery, the rehabilitation center, her brother, his childhood, and the lonely life behind his enormous fortune. Daniel finally admitted, "I used to think true love meant finding someone who would love me even if I had nothing." Maya looked at him. "And now?" He paused before answering. "Now I think it means letting someone know everything about you and giving them the freedom to walk away." Maya reached across the table and gently took his hand. "Then maybe we can start again." Daniel smiled, almost afraid to believe what he had just heard. "Really?" Maya nodded. "But this time, Daniel, no secrets." He squeezed her hand softly. For the first time, the billionaire understood that the greatest thing he could give someone was not money, protection, or a perfect life. It was the truth, and the freedom to choose him anyway. Several months passed, and Daniel's life looked different from the outside, but the biggest changes were happening where nobody could see them. He introduced transparent policies across his company, reopened channels for employees and families affected by past decisions, and required executives to answer difficult questions instead of hiding behind legal teams. Maya continued working at the rehabilitation center, refusing to become a symbol attached to Daniel's fortune. Their relationship grew slowly, with ordinary disagreements, shared meals, quiet evenings, and moments when neither of them needed to prove anything. Daniel no longer tried to impress Maya with expensive gifts, and Maya gradually stopped judging every wealthy person by the actions of the powerful people who had hurt her family. Their first painful conflict had taught them something neither had understood before: love could not survive where one person controlled the truth. One evening, Daniel and Maya walked through the same city street where he had once sat alone in a battered wheelchair, waiting to discover whether anyone would notice him without his fortune. This time, there was no disguise. People recognized him. Some greeted him, others simply passed by, and nobody knew what was in his bank account at that moment. Maya walked beside him, holding his hand. Daniel looked toward the old train station and remembered the question that had started everything. He had once wanted to know whether someone could love him without knowing his wealth. Now he understood that he had been asking the wrong question all along. The real test was never whether Maya could love a poor man. It was whether Daniel could become honest enough to let someone love the man behind the billionaire. And as they continued down the street together, he finally knew the answer. True love was never something money could test. It was something truth had to earn.